Good evening. Here we are. It's week 5 in the course, and we're moving right along. We're going to be heading into more work in the couple weeks ahead and through the rest of the course. So if you're finding yourself starting to fall behind or haven't developed your habits for doing your reading during the week or participating in the campaign headquarters or you've had a question nagging you that you haven't asked me yet, this is the time because we're almost at halftime, and this is the time to really kick it in gear and develop those habits if you haven't already, because falling behind from here becomes difficult to make up the work, because I understand you've got family and your day job, and some of you have your union work on top of your day job, and I get that that's all very real, but just be sure to keep up with assignments. So we're going to dig into the webinar here. So the agenda, again, same format as we've used before with any announcements I have, and that was pretty much my announcement that I just gave. Review of course notes from Monday's posting, updates from group work that we had, questions that any of you might have on the live webinar, and good and welfare announcements if we have a couple minutes after that. Again, questions are the same way. If you want to communicate with me, use the question function that's on your navigation panel. There will be a little X for cross in front of the word questions, and just click on that, and you'll be able to type in the question you have, and I'll see that you're asking me a question, and I will read your question and answer it. Try to keep it brief because we have a limited amount of time, so we want to keep it as brief as we can to get through all of our materials in a timely manner. So week 5, course notes. We had no text readings again for this week, and we'll be getting back into text readings coming up next week and through the rest of the course. But we've had some other assignments that I wanted you to put some time into focusing on that I'll go over in a minute, so I wanted to have you focus on that rather than extra text reading that I thought made more sense at this point. There are some course notes, however, for this week, and instead of course notes themselves, there was a series of articles that were attached to the course notes. There was just a brief introductory paragraph from me, and then there were materials after that dealing with the organizing of professionals, women workers, younger workers, and then there was a research paper that was about workers wanting unions. That research paper was a 2007 paper, so it's the newest that I could find. Those kind of papers aren't done all that regularly, every 5 or 10 years, and it was pre-2008, the economic crash. But I still think that the points that workers are looking for are valid today. And it's interesting. Take a look at that. It talks about workers interested in having more say in the workplace. But the way that they're describing they want it is on a shop floor committee level. So it's not, they want, sort of the insurance unionism model where, the staff rep or the local president comes down from on high and fixes their problems. The article talks about their interest in participating in the process, so that's important. The professionals piece, I think, is key. Part of it is the union I work for represents both professionals as well as non-professional employees or paraprofessionals, however you want to describe them. The particular affiliate of the union I work for that I work directly with is all professionals. They're either faculty members of four state campuses that I represent of the state university system, or the staff professionals. So they're all professionals. And they want unions. A lot of times there's this misnomer out there that professionals have no use for unions, and it really isn't true. Now, what is true is that many professionals have not experienced unions personally, because there's a big focus on blue-collar workers and on sort of pink-collar workers, office workers, that sort of thing, but not necessarily professionals. And we've had a lot of really big successes with professionals. And one example is the Boeing strike that happened several years ago in Seattle would not have happened if it wasn't for a handful of engineering professionals. That was the SPEA strike. That's the name of their union, the engineer strike. And it was critical to the success of the Boeing strike that encompassed several unions. And the professionals, the engineers that were part of that were key to that success. Now the difficulty is some professionals are hired as independent contractors, not the kind of independent contractors that some employers use to play games with the books where they say they're not employees, but the reality is they are, but true independent contractors, or they work for subcontractors, smaller subcontractors, engineering firms or technical services firms, legal firms, medical firms, that sort of thing. But, you know, that is an area that if your union is ready for that kind of organizing and it makes sense for the work you do, the type of work that your union does, then that would make some sense. But that article dealing with professionals is pretty key to understanding what their interest is. Women workers, huge, and an ever-growing part of the workforce. And one of the things that we witnessed with the decline of manufacturing and the deindustrialization of America is that many of those that were hit by that were male workers, blue-collar workers that had either very little formal education and skill or were semi-skilled. And that's a problem because we have really not found a place for many of those workers that replaces the wages and the benefits that they lost. So women workers are an area that is up and coming. They work in different sectors than the traditional sort of male union member did. There is not as much in the blue-collar area, but they're in many other professions, many other work areas, many other support areas. And if you are, you know, sort of a traditional blue-collar kind of organizer, you have to understand that approaching women in an organizing campaign is different. Approaching minority women is even more different, and it's everything from personal security issues. You know, if you knock on their door with, you know, two guys with some pamphlets and, you know, you start asking them about their workplace, that can be far more intimidating than others may find it, you know, simply because there may be personal security threats that they feel. So take that into consideration. Younger workers, very different way of approaching younger workers. I was at a conference with the NEA, one of our national affiliates, and there was discussion about younger workers, and I was putting out a presentation about organizing to the staff people. It was about 30 staff people from around the Northeast, the states around the Northeast of the U.S., and I was presenting on organizing some different techniques, and there was a newer staff person who was probably in her mid to late 20s, and she said, you know, you can't do this one-to-one approach that you're talking about. You have to talk with younger workers electronically first, you know, either through Facebook or by tweeting them or through some other social media. And I said, well, that's great for like an introduction or from, you know, sort of background material about the union, but it really doesn't replace one-to-one conversation, sort of that connection you need to make to help people to feel comfortable with the union on a personal level, not just an intellectual level. And she totally disagreed. And it was a very interesting, lively conversation about that. And I mean, personally, in my own experiences, if somebody contacts you electronically, it's far too easy to blow off. And it's harder to find people. I mean, it's harder to find Twitter handles. It's harder to find people's Facebook names. And if you can even contact them without friending them, it is a lot more difficult because it's a whole level of information gathering that is difficult to do. Not impossible, but difficult to do for the payoff you may get. And again, as I said a time or two in the past in these webinars, is you measure your effort by what your outcome is. The more effort you put in, the more outcome you want to see. So you have to measure that. So I didn't have a paper that was handy on minority workers, but it's very similar. That if you have, there are sections of the geographic area of the greater Rochester area that have more minority and non-English, primary English-speaking neighborhoods than other neighborhoods. And when you go into a neighborhood like that, you have to be aware that you're going to be noticed pretty quickly, and that you may not be able to speak the language. For example, I was in the lower Hudson Valley area in Westchester County, and we had an organizing campaign to organize home care workers for children, home daycare, if you will. And many of those women, again, female workers working out of homes, were either Dominican or they were from the Caribbean islands primarily, and they spoke Spanish. And as soon as I showed up, looking like I normally do as a NYSUT organizer, I had a tie on, a shirt, and Dockers, and I knocked on the door, and I had somebody with me, and I had ID, around my neck with a lanyard that had our logo on it. And I knocked on the door, and they opened the door like 2-3 inches and looked out, and the first thing they said was, social services, with a question mark. And I said, no, it's a labor union. And then you could see the expression on their face. They totally relaxed. They opened the door wide. They invited us in because the culture they were from was familiar with labor unions and very comfortable with labor unions. And there was all these little, as I lovingly refer to them, as little rugrats that were all on these little mats laid out all over the place. There was like 10 or 12 of them in this living room and dining room area. There was nap time for them. And we were sitting on the furniture all around them having this discussion about the union and how a union might be helpful for them in finding out what their concerns and interests were. And it was a great conversation, but again, it was 2 white guys that didn't speak much English or much Spanish, talking to a woman who was in a home environment, so personal space, and she was with a lot of children, so she was protective, and she just wanted to make sure that we weren't people that were going to cause her a problem. And as soon as she was comfortable with us, she's like, come on in. She opened the door, had a great conversation. She ended up joining. So just that's something to be aware of from your approach. The other issue is if you have an organizing committee, and this is something you really have to think about, if you have an organizing committee that does not look like, in many ways literally, look like the workforce that is being organized, that can be a major roadblock. If you have people that, let's say, like First Aid Labs, the example that I've been working on with the on the organizing example in the campaign headquarters, I pointed out for this week the new information is there are 2 shifts. So you need to have members of the organizing committee, that is the in-house workers that are organizing, be from 2 shifts. You got to have a representative group. You have to figure out, are there more women than men? Are there non-English speaking people that need to be represented in some way? Or is there a need to translate pamphlets or other information into other languages, or your website to have translation options, the little flags you see on the top of a screen, and many of those you can get for free. I think Google has a translation version of those that is pretty good. They're not going to be perfect, especially when you get into some languages that have a lot of regional dialects. Spanish from the Americas, I've learned there's Spanish dialects from a variety of the countries in Central and South America. But that's something to be aware of and be sensitive to. We're organizing adjunct, the part-time faculty in the New York City area with a couple of campaigns, and we had our brochures translated into, it was more than 10 languages, because there were faculty that their primary language was Russian or Spanish or French or German or another language. And we had to be aware of that so that we can communicate effectively with them. Again, be aware and be, it's called something called cultural competence. Be culturally competent of the needs and the approaches with young workers, with women workers, with minority workers, with professionals who may speak a different language and want a different approach. I certainly learned that knocking on the home doors of professionals was far less appreciated than it was for paraprofessionals or blue-collar workers. Blue-collar workers were much more open to having you knock on the door more unannounced than a professional was. You know, a professional was kind of alarmed that someone would come to their door because it's not part of who they are, not part of their own personal culture. So that just things to be aware of. That's why I think that part of a campaign, sort of the pre-planning of a campaign about, you know, what's an organizing committee going to look like? You know, it should have people that have natural talent, you know, all those sort of technical things you need, that they're proficient in presenting, they have good skills for writing, they can argue effectively, arguing being, you know, making their point across effectively. They can publish, they have electronic savvy with new media, all those kind of things, and those are all really important to include, but you have to make sure that they literally look and sound like the workforce. Otherwise, it's going to be real easy for the employer to paint the union as a third disinterested party. And if it is what you want an ideal local to look like, because you're building that local or unit or chapter, however you describe your subsets, when you start the organizing committee. That's when the beginning of the collective bargaining campaign, if you will, begins, is when you form an organizing committee, because everything after that is the history of how we got to a successful contract. It all starts with those early points. So consider all of those elements for organizing, new member organizing, and also something that I would call reorganizing. And that is a lot of times they've been called internal organizing, you know, where we're trying to get members that are less active or inactive more involved. Well, you know, I got a email from a member of the class that was asking me specifically about, you know, what do I do when we're sort of already established, already organized, and, you know, we have our officers, we have the way we deal with the employer, we've had multi-contracts, and we kind of are what we are. How do we get more members involved, et cetera? And one of the things you do, and I mentioned this at a previous webinar, is, you know, look at reorganizing your workplace. You know, what is happening that isn't working, and do you still need it, or do you have it just because you've always had it? What is needed or wanted that you don't have? And the only way you find that out is you've got to start talking with the workers, not by, you know, posting a notice on a bulletin board saying we're having a meeting next Tuesday at 6 o'clock, come one, come all, and you get 3 people and you get upset. You may have to, like, approach people one-on-one or in small groups and ask people, like, you know, you've been in the workplace for 5 years now. How do you think things are going? I noticed you haven't been real active in the union, and I'm just wondering, how are things? And they may come out with things like, well, I got kids that are home after school, and, you know, I'm a single parent, and I can't make the meetings. And one of the things that we've done at some of my locals in the past is had some sort of reasonable child care at the meeting, or make sure that there's food, you know, those kind of elements. So it's basically reorganizing your workplace. I would get away from internal organizing, because people, that term has been kind of beat up a little bit, and people think that it's, you just hold more meetings, you just do more of what you're doing, and it's not necessarily what it is. It's reorganizing your workplace, almost starting from a fresh sheet of paper and saying, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong? But instead of you and your executive committee sitting down and filling in those blanks, you have the members do it for you about what's going on right, what's going on wrong, and that can be through informal meetings, one-to-one meetings, surveys, all those kind of things, and maybe all of those things. So those are all elements to consider. You know, what does your workforce look like? If you've got titles, and there are a lot of a certain kind of title, I know that there are folks involved with law enforcement and with corrections in this class. It's an age-old battle that I have been involved with for many years about, you know, road patrol versus investigators versus correction officers versus civil duty patrol, you know, folks in courthouses, that kind of thing. and who's the real cop and who's not, and all that kind of energy that it takes, that it doesn't focus on the employer. It just focuses on, I'm out on the road, so I do more than you do. No, I'm locked up all day with inmates, so I'm more important and I do more than you do. You know what? Everybody's got to function in law enforcement, as an example. So just to make sure that there's sensitivity to those cultural divides and differences that may be in different workplaces, and to embrace them and figure out how you're going to be successful in spite of some of those issues. So whether you're reorganizing a workplace or organizing a workplace, I think the reading from this week hopefully will be helpful in getting you to get your mind around of that kind of cultural sensitivity that we have at our different workplaces. The research project review. So you had a research project, and most students got it in on time, and a couple students I gave some extensions to, and that's fine because everybody's busy and needs a break here and there, and I'm certainly understanding of that. What I was looking for, like I said from last week, to create a detailed, big bold letters, outline of an organizing campaign. And by and large, you folks did a really good job. I did challenge most students to think it through a little bit more in a couple of areas that I saw there might be some either opportunities for a better campaign or some weak points, and asked students to go back and rethink it a little bit and comment further. And it was really glad to see folks do that. And hopefully this project was helpful because it gave you an opportunity to have somebody look over your shoulder from the outside in either real campaigns you're working on now or campaigns you would hope would happen in some way. And the great thing is about it wasn't just just traditional organizing campaigns, although there were certainly those, but there were others that were out there. There were campaigns to embrace younger members, newer members of unions. There were campaigns to try to affect the public view of certain groups of workers. In this case, there were a couple that were working on changing the public's perception of public employees and their unions. And those are all really critical things to do. And I'm just really glad that you were out there fighting the good fight and doing the work that matters. And hopefully this assignment was helpful for you. If you haven't done the assignment yet, I have given, if you haven't asked me for an extension, somebody better have died. and if they didn't, I don't mean that literally, if they didn't, you're going to have some deduction in points for your project. It's worth 25% of your grade, so it's a big deal, and it needs to be in, and it's not for me to beat you up. But it's hopefully that this will be helpful for you in really thinking out your own campaign and applying what we've started working on already. So that's was my review of the project, the research project. Group work. So we had some more information about the campaign. The First Aid Labs and United Workers Local 500. So what we found out is we found out the number of workers roughly that are there and their titles, the kind of work that they do. We found out that you have little information now, that somebody was able to mysteriously find a sign-in sheet from an in-service training that the employer offered, and it has the name and signatures of 80 employees. Now, it doesn't necessarily say what shift. There's two shifts, we know, what shift those employees are on. It doesn't say what title those employees have. So they could be managers, they could be security people, they could be supervisors, or they could be clerical, they could be drivers, they could be lab techs. That you're going to have to figure out how to tease through that. But many times, that's what a campaign starts with. It starts with something, some kind of a list. And that's yours. You're starting it off with 80 names out of 500 that are out there, and that's not a bad start. I mean, there have been campaigns that many organizers have been in where you were kind of guessing as how to get a list or how to get some names, and so you're starting off with some. You know a little bit more about the employer. You know who the 5 owning physicians are of the employer, and you know that some of them are bosses. One of them is politically connected, the brother-in-law of the city's mayor. You have a little bit of an idea of what their finances may look like. Again, they were written up as the best one of the best 100 businesses for 2013 by the Daily Paper. The same newspaper talked about their creativity and their approach to expanding business. Here's the key part: while holding down costs. Now, connect that phrase with information that you have early on about people having sick leave cut, etc., and not having wage increases for 2 years, and you've got a little bit of an argument to put together already. Sounds like it could, that newspaper article, if you can get your hands on it, could be a part of a literature hand out at doors. If this, expense is being held down at your expense with a question mark kind of a thing. So keep in mind that, you're the regional organizer for this union. Your approving entity, the regional office, whoever that is, whether it's elected or staff, has given you the green light to go ahead and start, and you have very little help. You have one staff organizer, so one other person, and a staff researcher. Staff researchers can be helpful. You don't just think of them in terms of employer research, which they can be, but a lot of times they can be handy in helping you with your new media campaign if you don't have, to get some things up and running, like a basic shell of a website that you don't necessarily have viewable for the public, but you can get started on some things about what because they're all time-consuming, that detail stuff, and it's great if you can get some of those basics out of the way and underway already and have those waiting for you until you have content. Same thing with getting an account for Twitter, getting an account for Facebook, or whatever kind of other media that you decide as the organizer makes sense for this campaign. And you have a green light. You have complete control over the kind of campaign and the kind of unit that you want to create. You just have to keep the regional office updated as to your plans and actions, which is pretty typical of a lot of organizers. So what I've asked you was a few basic questions. Create an organizing committee with the ratio, it says ratio of 1 to 15, that is committee members to workers. That's a pretty average estimate of what's doable to stay in touch with workers. So you can do the math of how many people you need. It's going to be a committee of about 24 people or so, depending on the size of the unit that you want to carve out. And they should be representative of the workers that you're looking to organize, including shifts, titles, if there's significant ethnic groups, that sort of thing, of what it would look like, women workers versus men, that kind of thing. And you want to do that because you want those workers to actually be the ones who circulate the authorization cards if that's what you're going to do, or sign on to a petition if that's the approach you're going to take, or just to operate silently for a while you gather more information without going public or without talking about it in the workplace, if that's your approach. There's a lot of ways to approach these campaigns, and you have complete license, according to the regional office, to decide how you want to approach it. So that's what I want you to flesh out with that question. Second one was, with that sign-in list that you have as your first step, how will you go and find out who the workers are? You only have names and signature. If part of your plan is to do home visits, that is, visit people at their homes and have conversations with them at their doorstep, how will you go about finding their home addresses? And that happens. And there are ways of doing it. There are some resources out there that are not bulletproof, but they're helpful. One of the ones that I use, there's a bunch you can use. You can actually buy lists of addresses if you can find some names and a rough geographic area. Some unions buy those. My union didn't. They may be doing that now. I don't do direct organizing in what I do now, but they may be doing it now. But before, it was the old-fashioned way, and there was a website called, it's pronounced people.com, PIPL.com. And if you have the person's name, and if you have a city, ideally, that they may live in or near, it's pretty good at finding records, or not records, but finding people and finding even like names of relatives. So if you want to try it out, go to PIPL.com and put your own name in and see what it comes up with. It's a way of finding out a little bit more than you had before, And then the other thing is from there's all kind of services that different groups will sell you to find out, exact home addresses, because sometimes it'll only give you a rough area, and sometimes the home addresses that it'll give you are old addresses. And unfortunately, sometimes the only way to find that out is you knock on the door and you say, oh, they used to live here, but they don't live here anymore. And then you can ask, do you know where they are now? But it's harder to find it that way. So there is a little bit of goose chase that happens, and it's time-consuming with door-to-door, but it's a great way of having a personal conversation. Another thing is, what do you want your unit to look like? Do you want just a clean campaign with one title and run with that? And remember, I talked in the past about the difficulty or the danger of doing that unless you think that's the best way to go, in that the company can use the people that were left behind, so to speak, outside of this campaign that are non-supervisory and non-security and say they don't care about you, so why should you do anything to encourage people to join a union? So let's say you're going to go after the lab techs because there's a big chunk of them, they're all in one title, they're a little bit more homogeneous in terms of an approach and messaging, et cetera. And you skip the drivers and you skip the clerical employees. Well, part of the difficulty with that is you're leaving 100 people behind. And the other thing is drivers have access to all the workplaces. There's 3 shops that you have to organize with 2 shifts. And they have a limited access to the docks, or at least the lab sites, where they pick up the samples for analysis to drive them back. That could be handy in a broader campaign. Clerical employees have lots of information, and they can mysteriously find things, names, lists, that sort of thing that you can't get from other places if they are truly a part of your campaign. It makes your task a little harder because you've got now more than one title to deal with, and you've got potentially some competing interests, but that has to be addressed by how you set up the organizing committee, et cetera. And so think about that, of how you want to set up the bargaining unit. But those are just a couple things to consider. The lab techs are low paid. They're $10 an hour for starting lab techs and less than that for clerical and for drivers. So it's not like the lab techs are making $30 an hour and the clerical and the drivers are making $8 an hour. You've got people that are still within a fairly close range of salary so that their economic interests are similar. They've both taken hits with no raises. They've all taken hits with sick leave being taken away, et cetera. So just some things to consider when answering that question. And then the last thing is there anything else you would do at this early stage of the campaign that I didn't suggest or question? Add your own thoughts. I mean, that you've gotten into the role here a little bit more where you can start thinking out of the box, and I don't have to lead you all the way by yourself. So that was the course group work for this past week, and I might have a little bit of more information coming up on Monday. But again, check the campaign headquarters each Monday for any new postings there might be about the campaign. Wow, look at that. There's a midterm exam. It's midterm next Monday already. It'll be week 6. That's just past the halfway point. We're kind of at the halfway point now between week 5 and 6. So there will be on the assignment page of the course website starting next Monday, October 28th, at 4 in the morning Eastern Time if you really want to see it that early. The midterm will be available, and it'll have an instruction, a little paragraph above it of how I want you to handle it and where I want you to send it and how I want you to send it and by which date. It'll be due the following Monday by November, I think that's the 5th, but the following Monday, and it'll be due by 5 o'clock on that day, my time, Eastern Time. It's Halloween week, so you can either look at that face I have on the screen as a scary Halloween figure or an evil instructor who is imposing a midterm on you. You can take that one however you want. It's another chunk of your grade, 25%. So between the midterm and the project that you did, the research project, that's half your grade already. So that's why I was saying it picks up steam pretty quick from this point moving forward. So that's the midterm. And if you have any questions about it, email me. But next Monday the sheet will come out. with the on the assignment page of the instructions, the actual exam itself. You just copy paste it onto a Word document, fill in your answers, and then email it to me on my regular email that I use, patdomeretz@yahoo.com. Questions from any of you? So we have a whopping 2 people. We've got Peter and Vincent they're on here now. Do either of you guys have any questions about any of the materials we've covered or about anything we covered tonight? Let her rip. While you're thinking about that at the same time, I'll just let everybody else know that so coming up along with the midterm next week, you'll also have reading on the course notes page, and there will be a few arguments about being in favor of belonging or joining a union, so that you can start developing those pro-union arguments when people say, well, my great-grandfather got screwed over by a union, and I don't have any use for them, and ways of turning that argument around, and also admitting when a union screwed up, which hopefully there won't be. That didn't happen much, but just saying, I'm sorry that happened. Don't get defensive, but just talking about that. We'll cover some of those points in the webinar next week. But there's also some text reading next week. So while you're doing the midterm, you'll also have reading in a couple areas as well. Okay, Peter's good with questions. And the research project, I just went over, sort of how everybody did. I won't have an individual I don't grade them per se. So basically, when you got to the point where I didn't answer you and ask you to change anything else on the posting you did for the research project, then you got full credit for it. So I don't do like a letter grade for the research projects, but what I'll do is I'll say, like, consider these points and post again, asking you to think through and clarify your thoughts or adding more detail. And if you did that, then you got full credit for it. So you two in particular were good and did a great job, and I hopefully gave you that positive feedback. So it's not necessarily a letter grade per se when it comes to that. It's more of you successfully completed, so you got full credit for it. And that's how I go about the research project. Okay. Benny also has in the reading on building effective unions, the research they credit is older. Do you think the same holds true today? What specifically was there about building effective unions? If you can specify, was there a specific issue there? Waiting for typing. Again, just waiting for a response here. And again, just in general, nothing specific was from 1999. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. As I said in the very beginning of the course, the texts that I selected were the ones that I could find that closest matched what I was looking to do with the course. And there are some, like the reading for this week, there are some research papers about specific issues around organizing, but it's difficult to find like an entire book on it. Even with community organizing, it's a little different to find books on general organizing that really fit what I was looking to do with this class. So the text might have some resources in it that are a little older, but if it has to do with sort of general basic core information about forming a union, separate from like, NLRB cases, or if it was done obviously before the split between AFL-CIO and Change to Win or those kind of things, absent those, a lot of the techniques are not conceivably different than they were back in 1999 or earlier. Other citations there are, plus the other supplemental reading that I've given you, are newer than that, and they're generally in the mid-2000s or later, and that's where I like to see the research. So I appreciate the comment, but I think the fundamentals hold true. It's just there might be some specifics, like obviously electronic media, that technique is different than it is today, but I cover that in other areas of the course. So I would say the reading shouldn't be considered in a vacuum. It should be a part of all 3 textbooks that we have, and we haven't had an assignment with one of the texts yet. You will in a couple of weeks. But also considering the resources that I give you in the course notes, as well as the webinar stuff. So it's a great question. But I'm thinking that fundamentals are probably good today. It's just consider it as part of a whole with all the other materials that we have. Okay, good and welfare. I didn't have anything this week, any big resources or anything to consider. Do either of you have anything going on that you want to brag about or talk about that you were successful with, or a tip for your classmates or anything like that? Feel free to type in the question section if you have anything for that. Yeah, this has sort of like been an ordinary time for me. I haven't had a lot of new things pop up. I did find one thing. I want to research it a little bit more, but it was interesting. And it was basically, they call themselves a union, but it's not really collective bargaining. It's, I forget the, let me look. I didn't save it on my phone. It's on this laptop that I'm using, so I can't get to it right now. But it's basically kind of independent, a union of independent contractors. Well, I'll come up with a name for next week under Good and Welfare so you can take a look at it. And they don't do collective bargaining, but they do kind of mutual assistance in helping each other. And they have a healthcare plan that's kind of interesting. And they do kind of like seminars on finding jobs, on putting together a solid contract as an independent contractor. So it's kind of people that are out there that may be part-time workers. It can be everything from, a yoga instructor to, somebody who does is a nanny, for an example, things like that. So it can be a variety of different looking people or different looking professions and work. So. So Peter has, looks like we're going to have a big fight with the Indian casino, with the jurisdiction, with the NLRB. Interesting. So Peter's working on a campaign on the West Coast in the LA area on a casino, looking to organize the security workers there, if I'm remembering correctly, and I hope I'm remembering correctly. And the casino has just hired the second biggest law firm in the country, Knight & Howell, and that's always the danger, because you can read them like a book. And one of the things that I do with my opponents is, I remember correctly, great, is one of the things you want to consider with your opponents is go to their website, and a lot of times they'll have seminars about like anti-union information for employers, or they will have a newsletter. And we have a firm in the central New York, western New York area called Bond, Shenik & King, and they're infamous in the New York, upstate New York, and also around New York City, and they have a Florida office because they got to have something to do in the winter apparently. And they are evildoers on behalf of the employer, thwarting our best moves. And so what I do is I sign up for their newsletter. And when they have a seminar, I do my best to try to get to it somehow. And somehow you have to maybe use an alternative email address, just a generic, Peter L. or maybe, Lucky Pete at yahoo.com or something like that, and sign up for it and make yourself look like an interested party, potential client, and sign up for their newsletters. And if they have any seminars for employers, well, you may want to pose as one. Just see what information they have and what they're about. Try to research what campaigns they've been involved in against which unions, and if you can contact those unions, try to get their literature that they had, that the other side has. I always keep my opposition literature because I want an idea, and if it's from a specific firm, I'll put a little sticky on it. I never write on it because I may need it for something, but I'll put a little sticky on it of who it was from. And if I can find, if I see a pattern of the kind of arguments that they use against the union from campaign to campaign by the same law firm, I'll make copies of it and hand it out to my organizing committee and say, here's what you can expect. And make sure that you share copies of these. And what I'll do is I'll have, I usually use Publisher or one of the other publishing, document publishing software. And I'll have like a small version of what they're saying, and then I'll have like bullet points arguing against what they're saying, or basically saying they're lying. And then I have it passed out, on non-work hours, worker to worker, using my committees with a 1:15 ratio. And what that does is it's something called inoculation. It, in advance, warns the workers that this is what the tale of woe is going to be from the employer's agent. And if I can also somehow find out how much, maybe from another union that was involved with this firm, how much this firm costs, how much they bill for, how much long a campaign lasts. Remember, the longer a campaign lasts for them, the more they can bill in billable hours. They don't want a quick campaign. They want a nice long fight because, if they're billing $350, $400 an hour, it's good money. And if they have 2 associates working on it, it's good money. They don't care about win or loss. They care about billable hours. So all those kind of things are interesting to let workers know that here's what the employer thinks of you, because they're spending money that can go in your pocket, and instead they're giving it to lawyers, because it's evil lawyers, blah, blah, blah. Peter also has, as they sent us a letter telling us that we're going to lose and it would draw the petition. Well, they're doing the boogeyman thing, and you don't even have to bother with that. So just be aware of what's happening in general, not just with Peter's campaign, but in general, those kind of techniques that you can use to do opposition research. Have an idea in advance of who the other side might be. Okay, then that closes out good and welfare. So next Thursday we'll be back at 8 o'clock, same time. We'll have, I'll put the registration link will pop up tomorrow on the announcement page, so you can register for the webinar. Alice will send me the link for the YouTube site, so you can, anybody who missed today can view the YouTube, or if you want to review it again, you can do that. And I think that's about it for tonight. So we're a few minutes before 9 o'clock, and I think we'll close here. If you have any questions, feel free to always email me, patdomoratz@yahoo.com. Good luck on your midterms that are coming up, and have a happy Halloween, which will also be coming up. It's always very exciting. And have a good week, and we'll talk to you folks next week, and if not before. So have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.